everybody. Welcome to a very different kind of episode of the Afghanistan Project Podcast. I'm here with Kate Kovarovic and Will Selber, and we're going to talk about some cases of Afghans who have asked us to talk about their cases in order to kind of be advocates for them and let you all know a little bit more about the ins and outs of what's going on with these specific Afghan families as they're trying to come over here and the difficulties that they're facing. So I'm going to give everybody a chance to say hey or say anything that they want to get this episode on the road. Kate, Will, take it away.
I just think that this is excellent timing given what we have heard about the SIV program, and I am happy that these families have reached out to us to give us an opportunity to share their stories, to talk about why it is so critical that we rebuild that program up.
Yeah, I agree with, as usual, with what Kate has to say. So I think that, it's been 2.5 years since the fall, and for most people, this has kind of faded into the background. And, in my conversations and, daily life, when I tell people that I'm still kind of working on this, they're shocked. They didn't even know that people were coming still. And so they're completely unaware of it. And it's this is the type of stuff where people can at least get educated and can be advocates for our allies that were left behind.
100%. You guys said it best. Well, Kate, I'd love to give you the chance to tell the first story. It was a really moving one when you brought it up when we were brainstorming how to do this. So take it away.
Sure.
Say whatever you need to say, and then we can parse through it.
I love it. I love that kind of permission.
Oh, God.
I'll say that this is a tricky story and one still unfolding, so we'll not be using the real names of the parties who are involved. But this is so hard, you guys. This story is so sad. It really hurts my heart. In March of 2022, when I was still a member of the Afghan Evac Coalition, there was a chat put in the main post or in the main chat room. And it was essentially someone from the State Department care team who was saying, we have this family. There are some unique circumstances here. Is there anybody who has the capacity to sort of take it on? And so the group that I was volunteering with at the time got more information about what those special circumstances were and felt that, yes, this was a family that we would be able to assist. So for background, the family is a mother, a father, and 2 young children. And the father had worked, he qualified for an SIV. And for those of you, if you are new to this podcast, and I really hope you're not, but that's, the special immigrant visa, which is one pathway to get here to the United States for people who served with the United States government in some capacity. So the father of this family qualified for an SIV because he had the requisite employment at the U.S. Embassy in Afghanistan through a contractor. So I think that's important because sometimes people think, no, you needed to be directly hired by the United States government. And in our mind, from where we stand, at least from the SIV perspective, if you worked for a contractor, that still qualifies. So he essentially went through and started applying for his SIV. And given what his family's circumstances were and the immense threat that they were under, they were taken to a resettlement camp in a third-party country. And he started to apply for the SIV. The reason why this case was so tricky is because one of the daughters, who was 5 when I first became acquainted with her, she's 6 now, has a life-threatening condition. And according to the State Department, they will qualify as a skin condition. And really what it is that this poor, sweet girl would have blisters the size of a full hand on her body. It affected, her vision was deteriorating. It affected her esophagus so badly that she couldn't process solid foods. All of her infections, she continued to get infections where she had all of these scars. She had webbing deformities in her hands and her feet. She needed surgery. So it was critical that we be able to get this family their SIV process very quickly because she needed medical care. Really what happened is that they arrived at the camp in April of 2022 and they stayed there and then they stayed there and then they stayed there. So they were there at this camp for 2 years.
Ugh.
Okay. And I recognize that at these camps, you do have access to certain medical care. It's not great, and it is certainly not equipped to help somebody like a sick child who can't even function around the camps because things are so unclean that she keeps getting infections from them, right? So like every night it was about 5 hours of bandaging her wounds to make sure that they were clean. So it was critical that we get them out. And this is where that story about all of these deficiencies of the SIV process sort of comes in, because the first step is that you need to confirm your employment with the United States government, and you get something called Chief of Mission approval or COM approval. So this should have been exceptionally easy, right? The father here had clearly the employment. We had the employment verification letter, but his supervisor messed up the contract details. Okay. I can't remember if it was the contract number or the dates that it was served, but there was one aspect of the letter that was incorrect. So we get the COM denial. Okay. We asked them what the problem is. We asked the United States government, what's the issue? They can't tell us, because at no point did they do the research to figure out why those two details weren't adding up. Right. So it took us months to figure it out because we don't have access to employment records. Once we realize this, we think, okay, no problem. We can just contact the employer, get a revised letter. It's not going to be an issue. Finding the employer and getting him to reply was 6 to 8 months, right? And making things harder was his name was exceptionally generic. It was like John Doe, right? So like it was really hard to track him down. And then once we did, we couldn't get him to submit a new letter. In the meantime, we're trying to get attention for this case and government support for it. And we just keep being told, we're aware of this. The security checks are underway. There's nothing else that we can do. Finally, we get that new employment letter. We resubmit it for COM approval, and it gets denied again. Okay. Yes. So this time we say, can you tell us what the problem is? And they won't. It is radio silence from the United States government on this point, and we have never gotten clarification on why we had that second COM denial. Okay, so we're now trying to work every avenue that we possibly can to figure out what is happening. And this is the first stage of getting an SIV, right? Like we still have multiple other things we need to do, and it's just not coming together. And everyone is saying to us, well, the father must have a security threat. There must be something in his background. Please keep in mind that by law, when you deny that COM, that like the Chief of Mission application, you have to tell people the reason why. And it didn't matter. I'm a lawyer. I was working with two of the fiercest advocates I have ever met, and no one to this day would tell us why the United States would not approve that application. Okay. So the family and I'm so grateful, the family just got a pathway to move to a different country because the United States just like wouldn't give us any leeway on it. But that was in February of 2024. Which means that family was staying at a refugee camp in unlivable conditions for 2 years because the government kept implying that there was a security concern that we can now only assume didn't exist, or else that third-party country wouldn't have taken them. So really it all boils down to that first step in the SIV this person qualified for. He continued to get denial letters. He couldn't get meaningful assistance from his former employer. And when there was something that stood in his way, the government wouldn't offer the clarity that it is legally obligated to. I'm sorry. I know that was long, but their path has been long. And so this is where we stand now, is that the United States government just never responded to our request for information. They continue to shun us by saying that, the daughter had a skin condition when it was so much more severe than that. And ultimately, like those people who served for the government for a long time in a security position and believed in what we were doing there has been completely and utterly abandoned, and I would say abused by the government.
Yeah.
Couple things.
Yeah.
I looked up the skin condition because you sent me the actual name, and I just want listeners to know that like it's the life expectancy for somebody with that skin condition is between several months and 30 years. So this is not like something that, oh yeah, it's going to go away, or even with surgery that it will improve. This is something that affects the length of your life. And one thing that you mentioned too is that this child is the size of an 18-month-old
Yeah.
at
She
the
was,
age of 5 or 6 now,
yeah.
because of her inability to consume foods and things of
Yep.
that nature. Like, this is not just some simple thing. And it reminds me of a story. You guys might have been familiar with this one too. The young girl who had survived a Taliban shooting in a hospital at her birth, that her mother was killed. The
Yeah.
Taliban just came into this maternity ward, started guns ablazing way before the withdrawal. And they didn't think she would live. She did live. And she ended up having to have a lot of therapy to be able to walk. But when the withdrawal happened, she no longer could go to therapy, and she no longer had access to the amazing medical care that she was able to get.
Yeah.
And her conditions deteriorated massively. And I wrote about her several times, trying to get anyone, it was this massive effort on behalf of the entire volunteer community to find any country that would take her, anyone that would help. And I think Portugal maybe eventually took her in, which is excellent.
Yeah.
But why? Why did we not do that when
Yeah.
she was known to us? And I think her father also was in the police, if memory serves, which would mean that he would be eligible for P1 or P2, one of the above, or that they could have pushed humanitarian parole through or something.
Yeah.
So
it's
it
hard.
reminded me of that.
It's so demeaning, right, for the government, and especially like in this case that I'm talking about, like they gave the case to my group, and we assumed that meant that they had some interest in us seeing it through, and then really all the roadblocks came from them. And I mean, we hit the ground running, and we had a story published about this family in Politico, and the reporter went all the way to actually like meet them at the camp, and we were engaging people extremely high up in the government, and we still could get no leverage, no response. And I just, like, the lack of integrity in doing that to someone who fulfilled their obligation, like I just, it's still to this day, it knocks the wind out of me. Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about these medical cases, as volunteers, we talk a lot about some of the horrible things we've seen. The photos of this child's medical condition were so graphic that in our little advocacy pamphlet, we had to warn people what they were about to see. And we could show that to the government, and it just didn't matter.
It is. I'm not surprised by this.
Yeah.
But I'm still shocked by it. I've come to expect this over the last 2.5 years. This kind of, dealing with the United States government, with the immigration, with the visa, and people having to become experts in this type of stuff, which have no background.
Yes.
I mean, Kate is a lawyer, so at least she has some kind of familiar understanding of it.
You assume.
She maybe took a course in it once at law school many years ago. But for others, it's like you're trying to read what the rules are and trying to show the government these are your rules, and we're trying to meet them, and it just comes back like sorry, or they don't say anything, which is the worst part. And you're like, can you just at least tell me what's going on so I can try to fix it? Right now I have one of my last interpreters that is in another country waiting to get out. He's SIV all the way through, and he's just did his interview, and we're almost there, inshallah. And it's like they want him to like upload some form, and like he can't get it to work on his computer. And so we're like, hey, who can I send this form to? Because we can't upload it because your web browser is completely jacked up, and nobody will respond to us. So, we have to like find a congressman to like do it for us. It's maddening. It's maddening.
I think that points to one of the like primary flaws in the SIV process, right? Which is like they give us a bunch of guidelines and restrictions and processes that we're supposed to follow. And you do that, and they are still not responsive.
Yeah.
And, you know, in our case, people were, so much of it was done behind closed doors, whisper. That's not what this process is supposed to be. It's supposed to be transparent. And it's also supposed to be reliable, because those whispers that we were hearing ended up being patently false. So we were hearing people at all stages of the government say it must be a security concern. He must have a really, really severe security problem. There was none. But you said it so much that it started to become folklore, and that's what people associate this case with. When you're talking about an immigration process, this is a legal pathway. We should be following the rules, and so should you. And that's the part that I, as a lawyer, was really struggling with, is saying, we abided by the rules that you have set. You should do the same. You have to do the same. And when it came down to it, what were we going to do to compel that information? Was our Afghan who was stuck at a refugee camp going to have the resources to sue the government for that answer? That was his only recourse. And I think that that points to some of those initial flaws in the system, which is the lack of transparency.
You know what it feels like to me is like you guys, the government stuck you in the world's worst escape room.
Yeah.
And we're like, here you go.
Like that.
Can you get out?
Yep.
Like, here's the thing.
Yeah.
Figure out the puzzle, the
Yep.
Rubik's Cube, the whatever. And it's like, no. Especially when, you know, congressional inquiries. I understand you can't give me personal details about somebody else. But if they sign a waiver that says, yes, please, you can have my personal details.
Yes.
There should not be any reason that they should not be able to understand why they're getting denied. And I'm seeing it now because I'm looking at all these revocations and all these denials that are happening from people. In fact, it's one of the cases that we're going to talk about in a bit. But why can't the people who recommended them or the people who are submitting the application find out the answers? They should be able to find out the answers, because otherwise, how are they going to perfect the process?
Right.
And get to the ultimate goal? And now it's, well, can you? Because here, by the time that this comes out, I just heard from State Department, September 2024 is when we're going to run out of SIVs.
Yeah.
At the current rate of about 8,000 left, without Congress appropriating more.
Yeah.
And it's like, what's going to happen to all these people?
Yeah. I think, Beth, we were talking about what this threat to the SIV program is. And I said, it's like Sisyphus, where it reminds me of, but the people who are being punished haven't done anything wrong, but we are expected to just constantly go up and down the hill because there's nobody else who's willing to intervene. And people aren't made for that kind of capacity, right? So like this family that we were working with, like that mother threatened suicide. And I don't even know if threatened is the right word. That was where her mindset was for almost the entire time that they were at the camp. And it was because of that hopelessness, because we had no answers. Like we couldn't even answer the questions that she was asking that by law we should have been able to. And this is somebody who even, like, we did get the comm letter. Like we did get the letter from the HR rep. There are hundreds or thousands of Afghans who have not ever been able to track down their former US-based employer to even get those letters.
Yep.
This is a system that's not only, it's unrealistic given what the situation is, but also like it exploits its own weaknesses to hurt the Afghan applicants further.
Yeah, the Afghan that my former interpreter right now, the only reason why I got back involved is that he got a lawyer through his sister's friend, and I had written him a letter almost a decade ago, and he found me on LinkedIn or something like that, and I happened to pop back in, and I was like, oh my God, he's still alive, and the Mission Essential personnel had said that he had gotten fired, and didn't do his year-long service, and so I had to sign an affidavit saying that was incorrect, and that he had, and that I had been his supervisor, and all the different types of stuff I had to provide. And he's almost there, but like it's just maddening that this is what it has become. It has become, that the very people, I say this all the time, but like the very people who fought this war for the last 20 years are the ones who are picking up the pieces, a lot of them, and then good people like yourselves as well joining the team. But it's wrong. It's wrong. It's just wrong. And the inability of anybody to say that out loud makes it even worse.
You talk about MEP. I've heard so many bad stories about MEP, and it just makes me mad that they said that, because I've gotten plenty of Afghans reaching out to me saying I worked for Mission Essential and they said this and they said that, and to hear that they actually did mess that up and that you personally are aware of them messing that up is just like.
And I called them on the phone when I was active duty, and I was like, "Hey, what's going on here?" It's like, "Well, our records say that he was fired." I was like, "Your records are wrong." Like, here's pictures of me with him from this point to this point, and they didn't budge. They're like, "No, that's what our records show." Okay.
So much of what's happening is based on human error that we could easily work around, right? Like if we just had better record keeping or things like that. And also what I'm thinking of course, is Project Rabbit, right? And so, for those who might not know, it was that database that was set up, I believe, by DoD actually. And it was supposed to be where contractors, the employers, could submit HR information into a database so that when an Afghan needed it to apply for their SIV, it was there. But that program was so deeply flawed, in part because it relied entirely on the former employers taking action when they weren't actually compelled, right? So we were just expecting that they would have all of the necessary documentation and that they were going to come and just voluntarily upload it for every Afghan who had ever contracted with them. It completely relieved DoD and DOS of any sort of liability in doing that. The website itself was largely non-functional, and then suddenly it just stopped working. And there was no announcement that they had decided that Project Rabbit, needed to be closed down because it had been, by their word, like too popular, right? It had been too heavily used. And so they're still directing people to a website that they have shut down because it wasn't doing what they wanted it to. And so like when we look at this process, I understand that you need people to really like willfully and actively engage in it, but you're making it easy for every single Afghan to slip through the cracks because the whole system is just one broken foundation. It's just like it hurts.
Yeah. And so Project Rabbit is a pet peeve of mine.
Fair.
No pun intended about the rabbit part. I don't know, whatever. But, now it's like DAS T or whatever. And I remember when I first started asking about it, because all these Afghans are telling me, I know there is no one who is better at passing information around than Afghan SIV applicants. Let me tell you, there is this whole underground. They know everything. And there have been so many times where like, hey, do you know what's going on here? And then I'm like, whoa, you guys, thank you. Or anyway, the point is Project Rabbit, everybody knew about it. Nobody knew how to get it working for them. And the first time I asked DoD about it, they're like, we can't really talk about that. And they were so cagey about the details, except they wanted to make sure that I knew that the processing time for somebody to get calm through Project Rabbit was faster than if the applicant were doing it on their own. Then IRAP did a giant dive into it and found that actually with time it was slower and it wasn't working. And here I am. So in fact, recently I had been dealing with this group of L3 Harris employees. They were radio support personnel, and they were all trying to get SIV, and L3 Harris had just sent them a joint LOR HR letter, which immediately everybody was getting denied. And they're like, what the hell? I think there were several hundred of them, at least more than 100.
Yeah.
And I had all of them in my inbox, and I was dealing with L3 Harris, and they didn't give a crap. And then they got working with Project Rabbit, and they were cagey about that. Oh, well, we can't talk about what's really happening here. And it's like, people's lives are on the line. Like the Taliban is trying to find these people because they think that they have the information to get radios working. So actually this matters.
Yeah.
And even today, I just got an update this week. All of the people are being told, well, Project Rabbit is slowly working on it. Project Rabbit doesn't exist. DAS-T exists, but if L3 Harris is telling you Project Rabbit, that's concerning. And
Yeah.
I want to call their HR people and just ream them again about
And,
all of this.
And they're putting numbers there. No, I'm like also like really heavily against this because they're still putting numbers out there to imply that Project Rabbit is still functional in some capacity, right? So like some report that just came out said, well, we can only process about 100 of those per month. So like the backlog that already exists, they're saying is 6 years. That cannot possibly be right. And one of the numbers that like really, I wrote it down because I was so shocked by this. They're touting, hey, 80% of people who applied through Project Rabbit for a letter received, like they were matched with their employer in those first 6 months of operation. So that's a little over 5,000 people. Since February 2023, they've only matched 1,396 cases. Okay. And at first glance, we might say, hey, 1,000, that sounds great. Keeping in mind that there is a current backlog of SIV applicants of 130,000. So that's not going to help anybody. And we're just, by directing people to a website that isn't functional, we're giving hope where it shouldn't exist.
Especially now that we
Yeah.
know that there are 8,000 SIVs left,
Yeah.
and Congress doesn't want to appropriate the ones that are being required. It's just so galling on
Yeah.
every single level. Like
Oh no, I'm with
livid here. Well, why don't we talk about another case, because it's another SIV case, and then there's an HP case too. So the SIV case is a former Floor employee, and for people who are not familiar with Floor, they were a contractor. They just kind of did all the things around different bases. And so this individual worked at FOB Moorhead, and I've got his SIV recommendation here from his American, supervisor, who has nothing but great things to say about his 17 months of work with Floor. Now let's see, I want to get these dates right. I am not like you, Kate. This is not one of those cases that I know like backwards and forwards. I don't want to get it wrong.
I have notes on my computer.
Oh, did you? I was not that good because I'm trying to write about this SIV issue, and I'm just like, wow, my hair's on fire. But so this person got their original COM approval in December of 2021. Everything's good. Individual is a national of Afghanistan, has been employed by or on behalf of the U.S. government, faithful and valuable service, experiences ongoing serious threat as a consequence of employment. All those things are checked. Okay, so then we have let's get that time right too. Too many pieces of paper here. Basically, they got COM revoked in August of 2023. You were previously granted COM approval to access the SIV program. We regret to inform you that COM withdrew support because new information has come to our attention as specified below. Lack of sufficient documents to make a determination. You did not provide a valid LOR. So now they have resupplied a new LOR, the one that I was looking at from their the other recommender from Floor. And in the aftermath they're still waiting to find out what's going to happen. And I want to get you guys' take on it while I try to see if there is something in here about what has happened since.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that this happens, that somebody who is, and the thing is that like there's so many of these cases for people who don't have the ability to have somebody to advocate for them. For every person that I'm helping, I always remind myself there's so many that are swimming somewhere trying to latch on to anybody that can help them traverse an American bureaucratic process that most Americans can't figure out. You have to be, it's like the DMV from hell. That's what I tell people. It is the DMV from hell. It is just maddening. It is like dealing with the DOD at the worst levels of the Pentagon. And you're just like, is anybody going to answer this question? And they'll just wait you out. They will just wait you out because they're hoping that you're just going to go away.
I think what's so startling for me, especially as a lawyer, right, the lack of
Yeah.
accountability on behalf of the government, because I do understand that there is national security implications involved in applying for these visas. I understand that we need certain evidence and, there's a process that has to be followed. And I understand and I support that. But why aren't we looking at the percentage of government error in these things? Because Beth, I remember, I think you sent that case to us to look at before the podcast, and the LORs were patently the same, right? So, like, it really just was that somebody who was reviewing it didn't look at it closely enough. Or for the case that I was talking about, they just didn't look up the contract in a database that they have access to and we don't. So at what point are we going to say, not only is the system failing, but you guys, you're the reason why a lot of these SIVs are either getting, denied initially or then revoked. And we have to think about the mental health implications of doing that to people. And what does it mean when your COM approval gets withdrawn because you submitted the right letter?
Well, and so I did just read over what this individual sent to me when they first contacted me. And so their first LOR provider just did not fulfill, he didn't verify his LOR, he says.
Right.
And so here's what he says about what happened since June 2021. I was unemployed. I had to sell my property, home items for feeding my small children. Right now, my family and I are eating every month with donated foods. And he mentions the names of the people who have been providing his food packages. Now I appeal and request the chief of mission, please return my old COM approval with my same case position. My family and I are subject to the law. I've attached my LOR. And here's the additional information that's important. Last year, in November of 2022, I received the first call and email from a team who told me, are you ready for the next flight?
Oh, God.
I told them, yes, we are ready. Then I sold all my home items. But unfortunately, and this is, so are you ready for a flight? 9 months later,
Yep.
COM withdrawn.
Yep.
It's
that,
like,
that hurt.
Yep. Mm-hmm. It's just awful. It's just so stupid.
There's so many clear ways that we could avoid this that it almost seems willful.
Yes.
Like it's just like, are you guys enjoying watching what you're doing to these people who served us, and they served us faithfully and they served us well? And it's not even the Afghans who are only involved. Like I imagine, like what Will is saying, like it must be so painful when the people who served alongside him and made his service possible are now stuck in the system. I
much pain. And I will say, I've talked to State Department personnel, and I know that they are working hard, and this has to affect them too, right? I mean, it has to affect them. And they've got to follow these rules and these laws, but it does feel like, as an outsider looking in, like you just, do you recognize what happens when you say no?
Yeah.
Do you see it? Because I hear it in these things, and you hear it in, the woman saying, I want to die. And I've heard from people at that camp that they also did want to die. And I had people saying, let me send you pictures of the camp that that family with the young daughter was in, of how bad it is here. And to me, it was like, hey, I've got a bunch of other people with the Taliban on their butt, and so I can't cover that right now. I believe you, but I can't handle that.
And I
that's
think
the thing, you're triaging the trauma, right?
Yeah.
And that's not fair either.
No, it's not. You have to kind of figure out who is in the most danger. So, Kate knows this case. I won't use a name, but I have a very close friend of mine who got his wife and mother out into one of the waste or the whatever lily pads, whatever we're supposed to call it, and the wife was able to make it through, and then his mother sat there for 18 months. 18 months. This is a woman who ran a girls' school in one of the provinces, worked with America's PRTs, like was a principal in charge of like thousands of Afghan girls. And it was, she had a security concern because of a number that had contacted her. I'm just like, are you guys, like, we have been at war for 20 years and you're not totally on board with the fact that like they know people who are going to call them on the phone that are just going to be like Talibs, like, they're the government, people. Like, of course. Like, it's mind boggling. And it's one of the things that I always tell Afghans. And I'm like, you have to understand, you can be rich and a powerful nation and also be dumb at the same time. They're not the same thing. They're not the same thing.
Is that the same woman? Because this sounds very similar to a story that I covered back in the beginning, who had an ID placed on her front doorstep by the Taliban for doing, because there was another woman who
this is a different one.
And there had been an ID during the time placed on. It was just crazy. It's like, wow. And of course, the Taliban are trying to contact everybody, and
this woman is very lucky because her son is an American citizen and like understands the bureaucratic nature and can navigate it on his own and knows who to call and is very well connected. And so, like, but anybody else in that, she's there forever.
Yeah.
In purgatory. And this is an elderly woman who had like medical conditions. And she just sat there.
Yep. There's a young man. He's older than me, but he still just seems so young in his, he's so exuberant and lovely, and I love him to death. And he's an American citizen. He worked with our forces for over 10 years, survived a suicide bombing. I might have brought his story up in our last episode. I talk about him all the time. He's been on this podcast. But he had to regain his sight and his ability to walk after one suicide bombing that he was party to in Kajaki. Anyway, he was so worried because his dad was in the NDS, and his dad was just totally terrified, losing weight gaining a bunch of weight, not able to leave the house. Always, they had multiple different apartments. And this was a man who is working a security job, has children, started working for Uber and other, driving services just to make ends meet because he had to support 2 families back in Afghanistan after this. But he knew, he was like, my dad was not okay and something had to be done. He flew, despite being covered in scars from surviving that attack. He flew to Kabul, went to their home and said, state, you're going to take me out of here and you're going to take my parents with me, because he knew his dad was not going to survive if nobody got him out of there. And they too got stuck in that camp for it was supposed to be 2 months of processing.
Yeah.
It ended up being 6 to 8, something like that. It was insane. And they were devastated too, thinking, should we just go back to Afghanistan? What is happening here? And the reason why at the time, I think that was when all of the unaccompanied children, they were bringing their families over. And so they took priority, processing them took priority. And it's just all of these stories. It's really easy to look at the numbers and be like, oh, look at all this stuff. You have to hear the stories. You have to get to know the people that are behind them.
I think that's such a good point right now, given what's happening with SIV, because the current administration is saying, but we've asked for more funding to get 20,000 more, and that does at first glance sound like a really great number. We're like, great, we can bring her, all of those people. But when you look at how many people actually need safety in the U.S., it's nothing. And so I think that's what's so misleading about this, is that we can sit here and say, they are requesting additional support for this. It's still completely insufficient.
Yep.
And that's all the advocates that I've talked to over the years who are in trying to get Congress to appoint those numbers. They're like, we ask for a little bit every year, whatever. But the further we get from the withdrawal, you're right. We forget about it. You guys mentioned that in the beginning. We forget about all these people. You were talking about, people said there are still people that want to come.
Yep.
People are still coming. Yeah. Yep. And the further we get from that, the less likely that even 20,000 a year would be granted. And so if you've got a 6-year backlog of Project Rabbit numbers, what the hell? Especially if we're not prioritizing based on, who should, I know that we've tried to prioritize people who really did put their lives on the line versus, whatever. But there are still people. I was talking to Andy Sullivan at No One Left Behind, who's going to come on and talk about this in a couple days' time. But, there are still people applying. and they haven't been able to yet because they're trying to evade the Taliban.
Yes.
And that's just a little more important than applying for this SIV, which is still open till what, December of 25 or something. What's the date where you can't apply anymore? December 25.
I think you're correct.
Something like that. There are too many dates for
we could be wrong. So if we are, someone should tell me.
I'll look it up. I'll look it up and put it in the show notes if we're wrong. But you know,
it's just people have to like, you know, when I was more involved in this, and I have to like not be as involved for my own sanity, but when I was involved in this hot and heavy, I had to find people who could like navigate this part of the process, right? Like who can like, you know, tell me about the SIV because I know about it. I've written like so many letters, right? But like I don't know DS-260, and then you got to do this, and then you got to do the medical, and then you got to do this. You know, I was much more involved in just like moving people around, putting them in safe houses, and that part of the game, right? And so it's just people don't understand that. Like when I tell them and I try to explain to them, I'm like, I can't do this on my own. Yeah. Like when I'm like, Will Selber got this many people out. I'm like, no. Will Selber moved these people around. Will Selber used his, you know, his rank to like write letters for people. But it was like this whole back end of people as well that knew the process that were able to make it happen. It's taken this, you know, merry band of brothers to like and sisters to do this on our own in place of the government. And it's just like, again, I said it again, it's wrong. It's just wrong. And until somebody comes out and says that those words, we were wrong, we're sorry. It's just, I just hear like people talking about it. And I'm like, no, congratulations. You've increased the amount of SIVs or you've gotten this many people out. Here's the thing. That's what you're supposed to do. Yeah. That's what you're supposed to do. It's like, well, I take care of my, like, as a commander. Well, I just want you to know that, like, I signed everybody's performance evaluation last year. Well, that's great. You're supposed to do that. That's awesome. Congratulations. That's amazing. Good job.
I think too, like Beth said something I really do want to return to because I am very critical of the SIV process and the humanitarian parole, what happened with that. And you did say, you know, we've interacted with people at state or DOD who are good people and who like really genuinely want this process to work and who want to offer us, you know, the support that we need. But when you are part of a broken system, your hands are really tied. And so I want to make it clear that I don't think this is that people, you know, we're just surrounded by only bad people who don't care. I think that we're surrounded by a system that's designed to work against Afghans, and the good people who are trying really hard, they're kind of stuck. And it reminds me of what happened with the humanitarian parole applications at the very beginning of the withdrawal. And so I won't get into that right now, Beth, because I think you said you had a case about it, but it's very similar to me.
Well, yeah. And like to watch too, I remember talking to like Ben Owen and some others who went down to watch Uniting for Ukraine take off in Mexico.
Yeah.
And just seeing the giant arena that had been converted into like a fun house and processing zone for Ukrainians who then would get bussed across the border versus like, you know, people from Central America who were living in crap places while they just waited for an opportunity to ask for asylum versus Afghans. This was before the Brazil path had been created. And all these Afghans, it's like every Afghan I talk to, they're like, yeah, I have an SIV and I have a humanitarian parole request. So basically I made USCIS $575 for each member of my family for something that was never going to happen. And here is one of those cases. So the father in this case was a Border Patrol policeman in charge of a K-9 team. Okay. And I've actually read his story on the podcast before at his request. And his wife took part in some protests and ended up hospitalized actually as a result of that. And they are currently living in a third country. So this family requested humanitarian parole, and in October of 2022, they got a letter saying that this is the response, and we need these items from you: a financial supporter, a valid passport, blah, 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 blah. And they started processing all of these things, I guess. The timeline is confusing to me because I've got I'm sorry. January 4th is when they said, here's what we need from you.
Okay.
That's why I was looking at the date of their parole request of October of 2022. So in January, they were told, here, you need all these items for us to be able to help you out. They didn't have passports. I actually put out feelers to people, and somebody covered the cost of the final passport they needed. But they need all these other things as well. And there's not really a clear idea of like what happens next. You know, they have to identify a benefactor. So who's going to be, I don't know if they have a benefactor. I don't know anything. And so what for them happens here? Now you've got the request for evidence. If they provide that, are they going to get humanitarian parole? Like, that's what they're believing. Is that accurate?
In my experience, no. And this feels really personal because just as a lawyer, what I was seeing at the very beginning of the withdrawal was a lot of legal minds trying to get together and already identifying that, like, ooh, the SIV program has a couple of gaps in it. There are way more people whose lives are at risk than who qualify for that. So what's the next best option? And that's why I think we saw this sort of flooding of humanitarian parole applications, right? And what was so horrible about it is that to us, we could look at these applications, and because we know these Afghans who we're working with, we could say, like, definitively, like, yes, their lives are at imminent risk, right? And it is an extremely high bar to prove. And when you're at risk and in hiding, how do you prove that? So, like, I, for a long time, worked with some of the female protesters, and we could put videos of them, like, at the protests, videos of them being hosed by the Taliban. We had articles that showed them in it, like things that were so clearly expressing that they were in immediate risk of death, and those would get denied. We had people who could, submit affidavits, and they could say, I have been arrested by the Taliban this many times. I have been beaten. I have been assaulted. Still, that affidavit wasn't enough. And so I look at the humanitarian parole process and I say, I don't think you guys have an actual standard of evidence here that's going to allow people to come in through the HP process. I just don't. And so even if humanitarian parole does get approved, I think the process for keeping people here on that basis, because it is temporary, is really shaky.
That's true too. Yeah,
Yep.
It's a 2 years of parole you get, right?
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
Then they got to apply for asylum, and then
Yep.
that's a, and because we've decided to just not do the Afghan Adjustment Act, there's no path unless you're going to get the asylum approved. And,
yeah.
Why am I doing this? Like, why am I like spending my entire life like? I mean, it's like it's just like, you betrayed me once, right? And now you're going to betray all of us again by making us do this work for you, by trying to will you to honor at least the basic minimum level of decency, of upholding the promise that me and my brothers and sisters made when you trained us specifically. I was trained specifically to go to Afghanistan, learn the language, learn the culture, and befriend Afghans so that they would trust us, so that they would fight on our side. That's what I did for a living. And to then pull this on us, it is a betrayal of such magnitude that it is hard to wrap your mind around.
Yeah. And you say we did the work. Like, Will Selber hit the ground running, and he helped with these legal applications that he didn't even know much about. How much does that really matter? And so I think, again, like, the numbers are really telling. So I pulled this between January 2020 and April 2022. USCIS received 44,785 applications for humanitarian parole from people who were living, like they're citizens of Afghanistan. They approved 114. Okay, that's 0.3%. In the meantime, they accepted that application fee and somehow got over $19 million in funds. Where did it go? It certainly wasn't to processing these cases for humanitarian parole, because I saw very little development being undertaken by USCIS in those. So yeah, we're not only abandoned because people like Will were sent there on a certain promise and now we're doing the work up front, but the work is meaningless. And there is no other word to describe it when you look at that many applications and 0.3% being taken. And let me tell you, of those 44,000 people who applied and said they were at risk of the Taliban, I believe almost every single one of them.
Yeah.
It is impossible to credibly say that people are not at risk.
Yep. And the reason that they're at risk is because we let the Taliban take over that country.
And now
we did not continue supporting the Afghan military with what it needed to make that fight sustainable and make it work.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like, how dare we? How dare we? I will say, I'm looking at this application. There is nothing on here about need to prove threat. So this family has apparently, unless I'm not understanding, has proved the threat to them. It's just that they need the basics. And now they're concerned too. I want to add this because they haven't had another child in the interim.
Yeah.
Only 4 people are on their original application. And so they're worried about what happens with the baby. Can the baby be included, and how does that work? You know, there are so many questions into, you know, I think that they really do think that this is like, hey, you're good to go. We just need X, Y, Z. And I feel like maybe that isn't the case.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not as sewn up as what they originally believed.
No.
The best part of this whole thing is, my favorite is when people have to, whatever case this is, and they have to have a current passport.
Yeah.
That's the best part. I'm like, so they have to go. This guy's a general officer. He was NDS, Unit 1, 333, whatever, you know, guys that, like, they're pipe hitters. And, like, the Taliban's not stupid. Like, they know who these people are because we left the biometrics behind. Great job. And so, like, what they have to do is go and show their face and, like, apply for this. You can't take the word of the old passports. Like, they have to do this. And they have to. Like, it's
almost legitimizing the Taliban, right? Like, we legitimize your passport office. Also, so like, here's a couple weeks ago, I had on Pashtana Durrani, who's just freaking amazing. What an amazing young woman. And she has been targeted with the Taliban IED before, more than likely, while she was speaking at this event. And she gave her spot. She felt like her father would probably kill her if she didn't let the older man talk before she talked. And so her opening went to him. And during that opening, the bomb exploded, killed the cameraman. So it was probably intending to target her. The Taliban do not like her. She is Pashtun. She is
they don't
strongly they don't like anybody. But so this young woman, and she was raised in Quetta, so across the border. Her family has this ancient route that Khan Bibi, her like old relative, would use to get across the border, because it's a porous border. And she, during the withdrawal, we didn't talk about this in the episode, but it's in her book, which I totally recommend everybody read. It's funny as hell, like, and terrible, and like, just, it's a great book. Last to Eat, Last to Learn. So anyway, she was trying to get out during the withdrawal and fled to Pakistan, and Pakistan wouldn't let her leave because she hadn't had her passport stamped.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like, are you freaking kidding me? The Americans are telling you, get her on a plane, and you're not going to do it because she went through, not at Torkham or wherever, getting stamped. What was she supposed to, this well-known young woman who is wanted. So yeah, that's the kind of thing that we're dealing with, is just so many levels of bad.
And I will say the one thing about, like, requiring the passports for people who needed to go get them. And I want to be sensitive about using this term, especially with this audience, but it is how it felt to me. It essentially felt like a death march, because we are saying to Afghans, we won't do anything for you until you have a passport. There's one place for you to go. The Taliban, all they needed to do was sit there and wait. And then every single person who was trying to leave the country, they knew who they were. Of course, people don't want to go get their passports renewed. Of course, they're in hiding for that. Why weren't we looking for other options when the only thing we were saying to people is you need to walk right by the Taliban and just don't let it become a problem. Like, get the passport, but don't let it become an issue. Okay, so do those two things. I can't imagine what it takes for those people to feel like their only option is to show their face to the person that they are the most afraid of.
Yep. Yeah.
It's dehumanizing.
Well, and I wonder too, and maybe you guys know the answer to this, like women aren't allowed to leave the country on their own in Afghanistan.
Yes.
So what happens if a woman has an SIV, just the woman, single young woman, and is trying to get on a care flight? Can she?
Yeah, she has to go to Pakistan. So I have a P1. P1 single female who was one of my contacts. And I mean, I put in for this. She was like maybe the first one that I ever put in for during the fall when it was, I didn't even know what a P1 was, right? It was like P1s. So I was like, here. And she finally got a call from care or whatever. And, it's like, people don't understand. It's like, what you're going to have to do is get in a car and drive to Pakistan. And then they're going to take you there. You're going to have to go through all these things. You're going to go here. And then you're just going to fly to this unknown place, right? It's like, how I had dinner with her when I was in DC recently. And I was like, you're one of the bravest people I've ever met. To take that leap of faith, to be like, somebody on a phone told me that I have to get into this vehicle and drive across a border.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God. And her family, her father, who had to be like, this is what I want for you.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's such a leap of faith. But that tells you how bad it is that people are willing to take that leap.
Well, because you're leaping into an abyss. You don't know what your actual options are. You don't know what the United States government is going to say. I mean, you are just walking into darkness.
Yep.
And I think too, like, all right, so we talked about SIV, which is the best option we have. We've talked about humanitarian parole. That should have been just so much easier than it was. And then the other options are these P1, P2s, which people don't really understand. And they're not meant to really help people in exigent circumstances, right? It's essentially like very limited categories. And if you satisfy that, maybe we'll consider this, but you're not going to get any financial support from the United States, and your case can't be processed, or can only be processed outside of Afghanistan. Like, every single requirement that's in place is unrealistic given what the situation is, but it's also the only chance they have. And I can't imagine what it feels like, especially given the timeline of these things, like sitting in that kind of uncertainty for years and years and years.
Yep. Oh yeah. Afghans were told this will be 12 to 18 months of processing. And then they wondered when 12 to 18 months passed, well, where is it? They hadn't even started the 12 to 18 months yet at that point. And like, the young woman, I'm glad that she got out. Well, the young woman you're talking about, I've heard stories of young women solo being in Pakistan waiting and getting raped because there's nobody there protecting them. And like, as a feminist, I have an issue with the idea that like a woman needs protecting.
Sure.
But if you're in a foreign environment, living in places that might not be the best, then yeah, you need protection against the men who might take advantage of you. And that has happened to young women who are waiting for P1 and P2 processing in this strange place, trying to just find safety. Like, it breaks my heart for them. It's
she was
unacceptable.
She told me that when she went through the border, the Pakistani border patrol, whatever it is, tried to extract a bribe from her, a very expensive bribe, to let her through. And she said, "I'm not going to pay it. I'll just go back." And they were like, "Really?" And they're like, "Yeah, that's fine. I'll go back." And they were like, "Okay, go ahead." They let her through. I was like, man,
badass.
What a badass.
But it's so hard to, like, also be the caseworker, like in our position, and to say, like, only thing I can do for you is to send you across the border, and I know you don't have somebody who with you and keep you safe. And so I want to be honest.
Yeah.
They might try to get money from you,
Yep.
sexually assault you. Like, I'm feeling like I'm upset thinking about the conversations you have to have saying,
Yes.
I don't have another option for you. So either we can do this and you might know that you could be very deeply harmed, or you could just give up and go back to Afghanistan and face the same type of threat. Like, this interim period is equally as dangerous, if not more so,
Sure.
because the goalpost keeps moving. The government keeps changing things and giving us assurances that then they can't quite follow through on. And so I just, you have to counsel people sometimes to their own undoing. And like,
Yeah.
that's how this should be.
Yeah, it shouldn't. I mean, like, I can't, just have lost track of the conversations I've had with people that are, I'm like, this is your options. There are no good ones. Like, you can do this. I don't know. I don't like, it's either way, like, it's going to be dangerous and you might not make it through. You have a 5% chance to make it through this way, or you're going to sit there and not do anything. I have so many P1s, guys, senior general officers that are in Iran, right? Because they had to survive, right? And they didn't want to go to Pakistan because of Pakistani ISI, and so they decided to go to Iran. And now, now they have the P1s, and they're like, it's like they're hearing that people are getting out with P1s, and they're like, how can I do it? I'm like, you're gonna have to go back.
Yeah.
And pretend like you weren't in Iran, because that
Right.
harms your ability.
Right.
So like,
exactly.
You've done something now that makes it's so tough. And like, I understand the ISI thing too. There was one of the very first people that I came in contact with, a lovely young man, pretty new to the NDS when the withdrawal happened.
Yeah.
And he had worked for one of the groups that was giving out P1, P2, but he was an intern. No P1, P2 for interns, even if they worked for multiple years. Yeah. And his family was willing. He had family in the US and they wanted him to be safe. And he's like, well, I've applied for HP. I think it'll be great. Maybe the P1 will come through and I'm just going to go to Pakistan and wait. And I had to tell him like that. The organization I was working with was like, yeah, we'll send you there. Here's how much it's going to cost for 6 months. It was exorbitant. Exorbitant, because they wanted to use that house to be able to push other people through, because everybody thought that this path was going to move.
Yeah.
And people were going to get pushed through and everybody was going to be safe. And yeah, Pakistan was the place to be. And I just kept thinking, please don't do this. Like, I was trying to facilitate these conversations and at the same time thinking, please don't do this. Like, and then he got rolled up by the Taliban.
Of course,
who told him, stop doing what you're doing. He was putting out news information on Instagram. They're like, stop that now.
Oh,
and it's like, and I don't know where he is now. I know he's not in Pakistan. I'm glad he's not in Pakistan, because that was probably January of 22. What would he have done? Absolutely nothing. And just gotten tons of money taken away from him. There is no HP for him. It never came through. Just
shocking.
Helplessness. Total helplessness.
Go ahead, Kate.
Thank you. I think our word is only as good as the system that we are trying to represent. And that's where a lot of this is coming from. It's like, we can say to people, here is our counsel, but we don't know what it's going to look like the next day. And I think, I was thinking you were talking about Pakistan, and I remember how in the beginning, we weren't getting a lot of pushback. It was seeming like, yes, this was going to be a viable option, was to have our Afghans settle there until they were able to go to their final location. And then things drastically changed, and the Pakistani government was coming and saying, nope, we're going to do everything we can to get these people out. We're going to initiate, like the police are coming to all of these buildings in the neighborhoods where we know that Afghans are. So like, we counseled people to go there. We found them homes there. We've been sending their food there. And suddenly we have to say, no, this isn't going to work. It's an impossible situation. And we had time. We knew that this withdrawal was coming. We had time to implement better systems and to know what was going to happen. And we didn't. And I just, it's so painful.
I would get into arguments with some people in the evac community over the Pakistan issue, because it's like, hey, when you get your P1, P2, it says you can't process this in Afghanistan. Yeah. So of course they're going to go to Pakistan.
Yep.
Of course. What would you do?
Right.
I can't be in the country where I'm actively under threat, which is why I qualify. Like, gone. I'm in Pakistan. And then they're sitting there and all their expenses are going up because as a refugee, you can't work. Your
Right.
kids can't go to school. You
Right.
can't do jack squat. You're just waiting. Like
Right.
every time I would write about anything that wasn't P1, P2 back in the olden days on Twitter, I would immediately get flooded. And you guys have probably seen all those activists that's what they did, is just try to get people to remember, like, we exist and we're struggling. And I don't hear it anymore because we have finally started to slowly process that P1, P2 category, but it's just,
it was mind-numbing in the beginning. I mean, the group Bill and I worked with, OSP, we focused a lot on P1, P2s. And I just remember like hearing the pain in one of our colleagues' voices when she was like, I can't work on that pathway anymore because I know that it won't lead to anything meaningful.
Sure.
God,
I'm
this
sorry.
is like
Thank you.
making my whole body shake.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have. I mean, and the thing is that there's no way for somebody that has a P1 to figure out like where they're at. Like, where is my case? Like, where is, like, am I close? Am I here? Am I there? And it's just, and so I don't know why that this one P1 who I submitted very early is still in Pakistan, while ones that I submitted a year later are sailing through. My suspicion is that there's a security concern and they got shelved, and they're not going to tell me why, and he'll just sit there forever. They won't. They will not tell us why.
Right.
They will not.
Do they have ARR numbers?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because that's usually like people will tell me, oh, I have P1, P2, but I haven't gotten my ARR. I'm like, no, then you don't have P1, P2, because that's like a subtle way of saying, F you don't, we're just not going to give you a number. Your submission has been put in, but no. And so that's interesting. More things to write about.
Yeah. And we just talk, and I mean, this is just my heart coming out about the mental health impact of this stuff on people, because and I think this is like a really weird concept for people to understand, but consider that your life is at grave risk. And so you are in hiding. That when you're in hiding for 2 years and you're under that kind of uncertainty, you also have no sort of mental stimulation. So like I have watched people deteriorate because they are either in crisis mode because somebody is looking for them, or they have been trapped inside for 2 years. They cannot go to school. They cannot engage with their families. Like, it is a really clear way to drain someone of their will to persist. And then you have the volunteers who are, they have lost so much, right? Like, I know people who have lost their homes. They've lost their retirement accounts. They send food boxes to Afghanistan or Pakistan or wherever every month, and it is the only money that they have. Now the government is coming and they're changing what the guidelines are again. We don't have that kind of mental stability, and we don't have that kind of like economic stability in this situation. So for us to not know what's going to happen, regardless of what pathway people choose, you are plunging people into such uncertainty that it is near darkness. And I really want people to understand that this is not just about like the mechanics of a legal system. And this is coming from a lawyer, but like there are deep, deep human impacts of this. And like the fact that we haven't in 2.5 years found a better way is demoralizing and quite frankly embarrassing.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how crazy it is that we can all sit here and just pull these stories out.
Yeah.
That like 2.5 years ago weren't even stories we knew, right?
Right.
And now they're so deeply part of us that like it's like instant recollect of, the story. His name is right in my head and I can't say it because I don't want to say his name, but the guy who I told, don't go to Pakistan, don't pay that money, don't do that.
Yeah.
All these people, they are all people that have become part of us.
Sure.
And yeah, it's more than just,
they're not a number.
No.
The government's really happy to tout their successes in the form of numbers, but when you actually get down to the human aspect of it, everything is broken. Everyone is broken. And we could do better.
Yep. 100%. And yeah, if anybody is listening to this and didn't listen to the episode with Kate and Will and I before, this is just a great way to transition right on over to that episode and be,
you're welcome.
Immediately made aware of that impact and what it means. So, wow. I mean, I feel like we could probably go on forever, but I think that this is probably a good time to wrap. And I just want to give you guys the last chance to have a final word, whatever you wanted to get out that didn't come out today. Go for it.
Kate, go ahead.
Well, you are ever the gentleman. I just,
Tell my wife that, please.
I try every day.
I know it's a losing battle. It's okay.
You know, I think that I've said everything I possibly can, which is that, and again, like I have the understanding that when you're involved in a legal process, sometimes you just become sort of an element or a criteria. You lose your identity in it. And I think what we're seeing now is that every single pathway that people have been provided, it just leads to more questions and more challenges. And we need to consider the people behind it. And I don't even, I mean the Afghans, but I also mean the volunteers. And I think that it is so hard that after 2.5 years, we are refusing to learn from what we have observed over these first couple of years of experience, right? Because we could make changes. That's what the law is designed to do, especially when you're faced with a crisis like this. And so I think in advocating for changes to the legal system, I'm hoping that people can open up their minds a little bit more and recognize that this is not just about a process. It's about the person behind it.
Very well said, as always, from an articulate lawyer. So, I'm going to do a plug for another podcast. Thank you so much, Beth, for allowing us to do this. As always, it's a pleasure to be on this one. I love the work that this podcast does. It's such an important place for people to tell their stories and to talk about Afghanistan. Me and Kate are going to start a podcast here in the next few weeks. It's going to be called Shoulder to Shoulder, Untold Stories from a Forgotten War. We're going to look at the entire war on terrorism. Some of it will be Afghanistan, but all the other theaters, and then also looking at it from all the different lenses, from military, civilians, spouses, aid agencies, everything in between. And the intent of it is going to be to have a place that we can kind of bridge the civ-mil gap. Because healing for everyone doesn't take place until we can understand what this war did to all of us. And so more to follow on that. And I just want to say that for all our Afghan brothers and sisters, we're still going to fight for you. We're still trying to do our very best for you. We hear you. You're not forgotten. And my prayers are with you and your families.
And huge thank you to Beth for being a source of encouragement 2.5 years in. It's so hard to find something that you can feel positive about, but I feel so strongly that your podcast is not just about advocacy, but about healing. I hear a lot of people who have either contributed to your podcast or listened to it, and they have felt seen for the first time. And so take a minute and say, you know, we're launching our podcast because we have seen the immense impact that you've had and you have inspired us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And 2.5 years in, when there is so much darkness, to have that little bit of light is like, I can't put into words how valuable it is. So just a thank you.
That makes me feel really good, but I'm really sad that I will not be able to be on shooting the shit with you guys every day. When you do your episodes, I'm going to be like, God damn it,
we'll come back.
Yeah, we'll come back.
Yeah, good. Awesome.
Yeah.
That'll be perfect.
Oh, yeah. You can come on ours.
With
drinks.
Drinks.
Exactly.
For sure.
Yeah.
I'm loving it. I'm so excited for you guys. Honestly, I think everybody, this is what I said to you last week, Kate, the more people talking about this, the better. You know, I'm never going to say, oh my God, it's another like awesome.
You were very gracious. Yes.
Awesome. It's another podcast. Awesome. Yeah. It's more people who get to tell the story, because I think the more that I talk to people, the more I realize telling that story is how you get through it. Like, you have to talk about it. And it's really cool to be part of that. It helps me every time I sit down and talk to somebody about these things. So yeah. Thank you guys. I mean, this is so funny. I asked you guys, I was like, so I think we'll do like a 20-minute short. We're going to do a short episode just to talk about 2 stories. And here we are, like
worked out.
An hour and 15 minutes later. And you know what? It was one of my favorite episodes to record, because here are all those stories that didn't get a full episode, but that deserve to be discussed. And things that mattered to all of us. So thank you guys for being here. It means the world to me.
Thank you.
And hey, to everybody else, thanks for listening with us. And, thanks for helping us advocate for Afghans or getting the word out about the Afghans who are involved in this process, because they are more than numbers. So Tasha Kaur, and we hope to see you again soon.